Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jeff Jones, and this is Truth Be Told. We often hear the military use the phrase, watch your six. Or you may hear police officers use the phrase, watch your six, or I've got your six. What that means is I'm watching your back. I've got your back. I'm looking and seeing what might be creeping up behind you, what might be a threat to you in some form. I'm watching your back. I've got your back. Israel has been wandering the desert for 40 years, and they are on the border of the Promised Land. They're just about to go in. They're in the plains of Moab, and King Balak, the king of Moab, doesn't like it. He doesn't want Israel there at all. And so he joins forces with Midian, and they make a deal and make a pact together, and they want Israel off their property, and they want them off their property now. However, Israel is much bigger and much stronger than either Moab or Midian or put together. And so they can't fight them. They can't push them off militarily, so they got to figure out another way. Let's look here at just a little bit in Numbers chapter 22. This story is a huge story. It's a big story, way more than what we're going to talk about today. But nevertheless, it has some lessons that I think you and I need to know and need to learn quick and need to know every day of our lives. Numbers chapter 22, verses 1 through 4 say this. Then the people of Israel traveled to the plains of Moab and camped east of the Jordan River, across from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, the Moabite king, had seen everything the Israelites did to the Amorites. Israel had just defeated the Amorites and released Moab from the slavery to the Amorites. And when the people of Moab saw how many Israelites there were, they were terrified. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, "This mob will just devour everything in sight, like an ox devours grass in a field." Now, it says they were terrified. This means they were so scared they were at the point of, or at least throwing up. Their fear was visceral. It made their guts wrench. You've been there where your guts just turned inside out because you had such fear. And what makes this is such an issue and ironic is that they had nothing to fear. God had already told Israel, look, when you pass by Moab, I don't want you to harass Moab. I don't want you to do anything with them. I'm not giving any of their property to you. You just go right past them, and I'm going to give you Canaan. I'm giving you what is called the Promised Land. Their fear let them get the best of them, and that's why we have this story in the Bible. And in King Balak's mind, Balak, by the way, means devastator. He sees Israel coming in, taking over all their property, taking over their livestock, taking over their grain, leaving Moab destitute. Again, they had nothing to fear because God was already, he was still giving Israel manna from heaven 6 days a week and twice on Friday. He was already providing for them. They didn't need Moab's property. They didn't need Moab's land. They didn't need Moab's cattle and livestock. They were not going to invade Moab or Midian. And so all of Moab, all of Balak's fears were a figment of his imagination, much like most of ours most of the time. All of this could have been avoided with a simple conversation. If Balak would have just gotten a hold of Moses and said, let's have a conversation, Moses would have told Balak, I'm not coming into your place. I'm not taking your stuff. We're passing through there. God has already said, do not take them, their stuff. Don't harass them and don't cause them any war. So he was just passing through. Oftentimes our fears drive us, though, to make alliances, as Moab did with the Midianites, with Midian, that we think that will strengthen us, but in essence, it strengthens our fears. We think we're fighting against issues or things or whatever it may be, but we're strengthening our fears that ultimately defeat us and divide us and conquer us. Moab and Midian devise a plan. Here's what they're going to do. Moab and Midian say in Numbers chapter 22, verses 5 and 6. So Balak, king of Moab, sent messengers to call Balaam, son of Beor, Balaam, who was living in his native land of Pethor near the Euphrates River. And here's what Balak said to Balaam. Look, a vast horde of people has arrived from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are threatening me. Please come and curse these people for me because they are too powerful for me. Then perhaps I will be able to conquer them and drive them from the land. I know that blessings will fall on any people that you, Balaam, bless, and curses will fall on any people that you curse. Balaam sounds like a pretty important dude. He sounds like he's got some power. Well, who is this Balaam dude? Balaam means devourer. So devastator and devourer were joining forces to attempt to block Israel's passage into what God has promised. Let's stop right here and make this note. If God has put a work in your heart to do, a dream in your life to become a reality, or a purpose that He's calling you to perform, nothing except for you can stop it from happening. Nothing. It doesn't matter who comes against you. Nothing will stop it from happening. Balaam, though, he lived about 400 miles north of Moab, in this town called Pethor, or Pethor, whoever's, depends on how you say it. It's believed that Balaam comes from a long line of sorcerers, celebrity sorcerers at that. He and his family, they had made their living over several generations, cursing and blessing people. It was a family trade that they passed down from one generation to the other. Now, look, if somebody wanted someone cursed or blessed, they would send for what's called a baru, B-A-R-U, a baru, a sorcerer priest from Balaam's family. They were the best in the world. They were the world-class #1 sorcerers ever. These baru, regardless of the requester's religion or political leanings, this baru would, for a price, a big price, say their incantations, make their sacrifices to some particular god, and then they would curse the other party in the name of that god. That's the way Balaam worked. He wasn't a follower of any one god, but of every god. He didn't matter. He would work for or against any god for a price, right? For a price. He was very knowledgeable in all the methods of cursing and blessing, and knew all the world's gods and goddesses. He was known and he knew. He was known and he knew. He probably knew Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because he's from the same area that Abraham came through. And he's from the same area where they all got their wives from. All right, so he knew who they were. This was who King Balak wanted, a world-class sorcerer who would take out this nation that God was blessing. He was sending for the most renowned sorcerer in the known world to come and curse Israel. This isn't going to work out very well. Balak had heard all the things that God had done for Israel. Israel's God was a powerful God. Look, he needed the very best. He needed the very best in Balaam to go up against this God who would bring plagues upon the people of Egypt, who would part the Red Sea, would rain manna down from heaven every day for 38 years, would find water in the desert for 2.5 to 3 million people. He needed a real world-class sorcerer to do this. Balak offers Balaam, a greedy sorcerer, a lot of money to come and curse Israel. Balaam turns him down and says, nope, God told me that I cannot go to curse Israel. I am only to bless Israel. I can't do it. But Balak ups the reward, ups the ante, and Balaam eventually comes. 3 times King Balak asked Balaam to curse Israel. 3 times the words out of Balaam's mouth were blessings instead of cursings. And to add insult to injury, Balaam ultimately prophesies to Balak the coming of the Messiah through Israel. King Balak was enraged, and he kicks Balaam out, says, go, hit the bricks. I don't need you anymore. But the story doesn't end there. Remember, Balaam is a man about money. And since God has stopped him from pronouncing a curse on Israel, he was out all the money that Balak was going to give him and that Balak had offered. But he had to find a way to make good on that deal. He had to find a way. If God won't let Balaam curse Israel through the front door, he's got to find a more sinister backdoor method and way to get that money. So what do we find in Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 to 3? It says this: while Israel was staying in Shittim, the Israelite men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. If I can't curse Israel to get the money, I'll advise the Moabite women to seduce the Israelite men, which will cause them to separate themselves from God's protection and God's provision. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, these guys were so brazen in their sin of adultery and fornication and bringing worshiping the false gods of Moab. They brought women and the gods, the idols, back to the Israelite camp. They were seriously dumb. God was so displeased with Israel that he caused a plague to come on the entire nation of Israel, and it killed 24,000 people. What came in from their six, that which appeared to be innocent, that which seemed to be nothing, infected the rest of the house, and they paid a very heavy price. Balaam wasn't a quitter when it came to making bank. He wasn't a quitter at all. If the Moabites couldn't hope to defeat Israel in a fight head to head and head on, they could cause them to lose favor with God through a backdoor means and method. So Balaam counseled the Midianite and the Moabite women to throw a party, invite Israel, seduce the men, and then get them to fall in separation from God. Never in Balak's wildest imaginations did he ever hope to kill 24,000 of Israelites head to head, head on, battle to battle. He could have never done it. What does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with you? It has a lot to do with us in our age, in our day. We could never be tempted to rob a bank to earn the extra cash that we need, could we? Would we do that? But we might be willing to cheat on our taxes. That's our six. You know, we would never cheat on our spouse, but we just might be willing to make pornography an active part of our lives. That's our six. We would never just walk up and shoot someone that we think deserves it, but we just might take our anger out on those at home. That's your six. You know, we've never cussed somebody out. I'm not going to cuss somebody out, but we'll spend as much time as we need gossiping about that person to make us feel better. That's your six. We would never think of attacking someone physically because they disagree with us politically. No, I'm not going to go fight somebody because they disagree with me politically. But we'll judge them and we'll destroy their character because they don't agree with us concerning the vaccine or the mask or some other thing. That's your six. Take note. Neither Moses nor Israel knew what Balak was attempting to do. Neither one of them knew what he was doing. They didn't know the depths to which Balak was stooping and going in order to keep them from the promised land, to separate them from the power and the presence of God. Israel would never have allowed Moab or any other nation to defeat them head on in battle, but they just couldn't help themselves when they were seduced by their own lust. The six, that which came up on their six. Solomon calls those sins the little foxes that spoil the vine. And when Israel finally, sometime later, got their hands on Balaam in a battle, they put him to death. He killed him. Sadly, Balaam seemed like a godly man, a godly prophet when we first meet him, when we first see him, but he was a tool of Satan. I'm encouraging you today, to spend the necessary time each day evaluating your six, to see if there's anything that might be creeping into your life that will separate you from the presence and the power and the peace and the protection of God. Is there a reason that God is not answering your prayer? As pride slowly crept in, and before you know it, it's living in your life, it's living in your life and pushing God out. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 15 and 16 say this: pay close attention to how you walk, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of your time because the days are evil. Keep your head on a swivel. Watch your six, my friend, because Satan himself is roaming around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And to quote Phil Esterhaus when dismissing his officers at the end of their safety meeting from the TV show Hill Street Blues. Let's be careful out there. If God is for you, no one can be against you and succeed. Have a great day, my friend, and watch your six.
Truth be told, the story matters.